Welcome and good evening. I'm Bill McDowell, Chair of the Center for Architecture's Louis Kahn Memorial Committee. I'm pleased to welcome you to the 31st Louis Kahn Memorial Talk. The Center for Architecture is proud to continue this wonderful remembrance of the rich legacy of the educational and architectural leadership of Louis Kahn. His work and teaching had an enormous impact on generations of architects, including my father, and continues to this day. We could not be more pleased than to honor his legacy tonight with a talk by Bjarke Ingels, one of the world's leading architects and innovative thinkers, as evidenced by his inclusion to Time magazine's most influential people. Thank you, Bjarke, for accepting our invitation. I would also like to thank our sponsors. This event would not be possible without the generous contributions made by the companies listed in your program. Many of these companies have supported the Kahn Memorial Lecture for many years, and these organizations all believe in the importance of good design and the improved quality of our built environment. Thank you very much. I would like to specifically mention our lead sponsor, Liberty Property Trust. Liberty Property Trust has been building the Philadelphia skyline and the Navy Yard for over 40 years. They have a nationwide portfolio of buildings and are one of the nation's leading developers of high-performance green buildings. We thank them for their continued commitment to the Center for Architecture and the Kahn Lecture Series in particular. I'd also like to mention that this event benefits the Charter High School for Architecture and Design, founded in 1999 as a legacy project of the AIA Philadelphia chapter. We'd like to share a short video with you of the great work taking place in this unique Philadelphia institution.
CHAD is at the cross streets of design and a liberal arts education, in the heart of Center City and at the foundation of a revolutionary way of learning. We are taking shape by drawing shapes with an old-fashioned pencil and paper. We carry our portfolios next to our books, we take our classes in studios, and we learn our art from those who practice it. CHAD is where 3D computer models are extracurricular activities, and the usual curriculum gets a facelift. How do you say paintbrush in Spanish? It's drawn the same in any language. We put creativity first and university acceptance letters in our windows because we forged a new path to higher education. We are designers, we are architects, we are artists, we are innovators. We are CHAD.
This is truly a remarkable institution, and a lot of great things are happening with this organization. If I could I ask the students and professors to stand up for a moment? With the lights on? There they are. And thank you to WHYY, our media partner, and Tanya English, senior health writer, who is here tonight and will conduct a discussion with Bjarke after the talk. A quick note of thanks to the staff at Big Architects who helped with this event and the exhibition, which is now on display at the Center for Architecture. And now I'd like to make the introduction of our honoree tonight. I would like to introduce John Gatuso, the Senior Vice President and Regional Director of Urban and National Development for Liberty Property Trust. John has been an advocate of good design for over 25 years and is responsible for hiring Big and bringing their work to the Philadelphia Navy Yard. John?
Well, thank you, Bill. It is a pleasure to welcome all of you to the 2016 Louis I. Kahn Memorial Award and Talk. And I think you're really going to enjoy this evening. This is quite a special person, and it's going to be, I think, a very invigorating presentation. To quote this evening's speaker, if documentary is to document our world as it already is, then fiction is to fantasize about how it could be. In that sense, architecture is the fiction of the real world. It is the canvas for the story of our lives. Now imagine for a moment if every architect, and perhaps more importantly, every client in Philadelphia and everywhere, truly embraced this notion. Bjarke Ingels' work has been described as pragmatic utopianism. Perhaps it is simply embracing the opportunity to maximize the joy one draws from the built world around them. Or, as my mentor Bill Rouse would often implore, perhaps it is the ability, if only for a moment, to see the world as if through the eyes of a child. Over the past decade, Bjarke Ingels has emerged as a major creative force in world architecture. Spend even a brief time in his company, and you will have to acknowledge that he is also, most certainly, a life force. According to Time magazine, he is one of the 100 most influential people in the world today. Wired magazine ranks him 8th, along with Thomas Heatherwick, on its list of the 100 most influential people in tech, a ranking that reflects in large part the importance of their collaboration on the design for Google's new Silicon Valley headquarters. Rem Koolhaas writes that Bjarke is the first major architect who disconnected the profession completely from angst. He threw out the ballast and soared, and with that, he is completely in tune with the thinkers of Silicon Valley who want to make the world a better place. It is not an exaggeration, actually, to say that Bjarke is a cultural phenomenon, particularly amongst the millennials, in much the same way as Jagger or Bono were to generations earlier. Born in 1974, it's a little staggering for those of us who were born before that, in Copenhagen, to an engineer father and a dentist mother, Bjarke is a graduate of the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, the School of Architecture. From 1998 until 2001, he worked for Rem Koolhaas at the Office of Metropolitan Architecture in Rotterdam. Beginning in 2001, back in Copenhagen, he established an architectural practice with Julian de Smet. It was during this period that Bjarke advanced the design for the notable VM houses in Copenhagen and other notable work. In 2005, he founded the Bjarke Ingels Group, also known as BIG, where he serves as the firm's creative partner. With offices in Copenhagen and New York, the firm today has grown to encompass over 300 employees. BIG has completed or has under construction major projects such as Via at West 57th Street in New York, as well as the Mountain and the energy plant in Ski Slope, both in Copenhagen. And the list of projects on the drawing boards is, frankly, just stunning. In addition to the new Google headquarters, it includes 2 World Trade Center, which is the winner of the 2016 AIA New York Honor Award, and the Spiral, also in New York. A new Washington Redskins stadium, as well as a major master plan for the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., are just to name a few of the very many big-time commissions that this firm has secured this year. Here in Philadelphia, BIG was one of the 5 world-class firms which Comcast and Liberty invited to participate in a design competition for a new tower at 1800 Arch Street. BIG's submission was a structurally daring, architecturally dramatic mixed-use tower that appears to share at least a degree of paternity with the recently announced New York Spiral. I'll let you judge for yourself. But actually a fantastic submission that was very, very impressive. Later this month, Liberty will complete construction on BIG's first building in Philadelphia, a 92,000 square foot little jewel box of an office building at 1200 Intrepid in the Navy Yard. While a relatively small building compared to, say, the Comcast Tower, we have been able to work closely and well with Bjarke and his team to create what we believe will be a very special, inspiring, high-performance workplace for Philadelphia. We are now exploring several additional conceptual projects at the Navy Yard with Bjarke, and what has been really amazing to me throughout all of this work is how accessible he has been, how consistently original the work has been, and yet how good at rolling up their sleeves and problem solving he and his team are. The man is as advertised, pragmatic and utopian. I think you'll find the next hour very inspiring and really fascinating. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce Bjarke Ingels.
Thank you, John. Yeah, it's a tremendous honor to be here today. I've actually been, since I moved to America 6 years ago, I've been traveling from Penn Station quite a few times to go to Philadelphia and to go to Washington to work on as distinct but as important institutions as the Smithsonian and the Washington Redskins, and of course our work on the Intrepid, and I think taking a train from Penn Station is a reminder of the importance of architecture, and it is a sort of like a great irony that one of the greatest architects of the world, and definitely of the United States, it was his fate to die in one of the worst buildings, and he actually died exactly the same year as I was born. So for good reasons, I never met Louis Kahn himself, but I did actually, because like when he, I think one of the things, apart from his amazing oeuvre of his amazing body of work that I've had the pleasure to visit, he is also the protagonist of one of the few super interesting and captivating films about architecture and an architect, my architect, because not only did he have an amazing career as an architect, he also had an amazing personal life. I actually went on a small pilgrimage with Hans Ulrich Obrist, the chief curator of the Serpentine Gallery, in 2011, and met with Anne Ting in San Francisco 6 months before she died. And had like this amazing conversation about her time with Louis Kahn. She was working in his office also, and I think I don't think that anyone would say that our work sort of is particularly sort of a lineage of Louis Kahn. But I think one of the things that we definitely share is that he somehow rediscovered symbolism and monumentality for modernism, and I think he had a knack for making buildings that were like super functional and very contemporary, but at the same time had a little bit or a lot of the same kind of quality that you see in this auditorium and in the lobby we have above us. That is sometimes sort of lost in the utilitarian pragmatism that has created spaces like Penn Station. So it's and actually we just submitted 2 weeks ago a proposal. Governor Cuomo made a call for developers, architects, and engineers to come with proposals for how to make a ideally fully privately financed sort of rescue mission to actually give New York City sort of a dignified arrival in the form of a new Penn Station, and I just hope that being here at the invitation of the Kahn Memorial Committee is a good omen for the submittal we made. What I'd like to do is spend the next sort of let's say a little bit less than an hour talking about the work of our office that we've been sort of developing over the last decade and a half. Our office is located in New York, and so maybe we could dim the lights if possible, on the screen at least. And we are originally from Copenhagen. This is our Copenhagen office. And it's, as a lot of workspaces are today, it's located inside a former factory, a Carlsberg factory, where they used to manufacture the least interesting part of the beer, the bottle cap. But I'll return to this because like there is something about these spaces that you also see in Louis Kahn, and you also see in a space like this, because it's not made according to some sort of strictly utilitarian dimensions, like why do you need to make a space taller than 10 feet if people are only 6 feet tall at best? But because these spaces are actually not designed proportioned to humans, but to machinery and cranes, they have a generosity that gives them a great pleasure to work in, and also an incredible freedom. And I think this is worth sort of remembering, and I'll return to that later in my talk. We have very devoted architects, and the way we work is that whenever we get a new commission or get invited to look at a design, we start spending a lot of weeks educating ourselves in what are the key criteria for this particular project. What's the biggest problems we need to solve? What is the greatest potential we can sort of unfold? And quite often it's actually digging deep into some of the practicalities of everyday life of the people that are going to be using this building or this urban space, and try to resolve that in a sort of poetical way. I think you can just keep the lights off. Just to give you a few examples, we did a sports hall for my former high school, and we could place it, two places, either on the football fields, but European football is the national sport of Denmark, so that would be a complete political suicide. So we decided to put it in the courtyard of the high school, but that's the main social space for the kids. So we wanted to dig it down. But excavation is costly, especially if you go deep. And it was going to be for a handball hall. And handball rules dictate 15 feet clear on the perimeter and 30 feet in the middle. So because we actually got the job from my old math teacher, we sort of designed the roof structure based on the mathematical formula for a ballistic arch. So the sort of gracious curvature of the roof is actually not designed by us. We're merely tracing the arc of a thrown handball. You have daylight washing the perimeter walls. Upstairs it becomes almost like a giant molehill. And even though it defies the regulations of sort of typical accessibility, the kids love using it anyway. The janitor actually believes he can quantify that we have tripled the use of the courtyard because he had to put up 3 times as many waste bins. And at a night, sort of the imprint from below becomes this like elegant little presence in the courtyard. So you can say like it's the parameters of what happens underneath that have sort of defined the architecture. To give you a more local example, we got invited by John and his team to visit the Navy Yards, and obviously the Navy Yards, the existing structures, again, because they have been designed to sort of accommodate these guys, they are amazing for accommodating people. So we got invited to sort of look at the Navy Yard around this square where they're currently, or they just completed this beautiful park designed by James Corner and Field Operations, a Philadelphia native. Amazing sounds coming from upstairs. So this park was already designed. It wasn't complete when we arrived there, but it was clear that, like in a place that was only like taking form right now, and which was going to be like a development very much driven by speculative offices, we thought, like, since we have such a powerful point of departure, we should inherit as much from the park as possible. And we were given this parallelogram site right next to the park. There was already a master plan that sort of laid out how one could build these sort of very rational volumes. And we thought maybe just sort of let's say like almost as if the very strong gesture of the circular park had sort of created a sonar ping that would sort of emanate from the park. It could actually influence our building. We could imagine that the main facade facing the park would sort of move back instead of a straight road. They hadn't built the road yet, it was planned. We let it curve and actually expanded the park ever so slightly, also creating like a giant canopy for people to enter the building. The idea was to do it with this sort of white prefabricated concrete panels. So almost like sort of like the elements in the bracelet of a watch, that with a lot of like rational prefabricated rectilinear elements, we could actually create a rather graceful sort of organic shape. The prefabrication, the elements that go in place, and that sort of gradually, even though each element on its own is incredibly sort of rational and rectilinear, it starts describing this organic shape. Also within the main spaces, you have this big open, sort of almost like industrial attic, but with this imprint from the park. So on one hand, like a very sort of simple, understated building, also because like each element is actually gently angled in a different way. It becomes this sort of 50 shades of gray, for lack of a better term. And here it creates this like inviting cave-like canopy at the scale of the entire building. When you look up, the tectonics of the individual elements absorbing the warped geometry. The glass is straight and rectangular, and so are the elements, but together they describe this hyperbolic paraboloid surface. And one of the things we noticed is that because of the inclination, the sloping glass starts, of course, on the lower levels, it reflects the surroundings, but to our surprise, also the upper levels, because of the inclination, starts acting as a periscope, that when you're standing in the park, you can not only see yourself in the park, you can also see the ships in the distance. And for the lobby, because I mean, of course, each of the floors are going to be finished by the tenants. But for the lobby, we thought it could be like this tunnel, this like almost like maritime wood element passing through. And adjacent to the elevators, we made a small atrium, but not like it's incredibly small, so it's not going to be the typical atrium. We just gave it a tilted clear-story window that acts like an actual periscope, so that and by gently rotating the atrium, we can sort of focus the view in the periscope towards where the mothballed ships are. So this was our sort of prediction. This is the periscope itself as it's being lifted in. And then sort of the proof of concept that you can actually, this is an iPhone photo that we have zoomed massively on, but I think we're going to return with better equipment. But essentially sort of, in a way, sort of trying to make a building that has a similar kind of raw and rational nature as the industrial buildings that we find so charming, and somehow tries to tap into a lot of the local character. The thing is, like, once you've sort of established what is the key criteria to sort of occupy the courtyard, but making it even more accessible, or by sort of allowing the park and the character of the park to sort of disseminate beyond the boundaries of the park and into the architecture and the facades. Once you've sort of identified the key criteria, it's almost like you know what the question is, but you don't yet know what the answer is. So you have to start looking for the answer by putting out different potential answers and evaluating, like by building a lot of different models. And to give you sort of an idea what this looks like, this is a project we've designed for Le Brassus in Switzerland, this beautiful Vallée du Choux, which is the cradle of Swiss watchmaking. We got invited to make a museum of watchmaking for Audemars Piguet. Monsieur Audemars and Piguet, they founded their company in this attic overlooking the valley. And we were asked to place a museum there, and it's basically a 150-year-old building, sort of a 100-year-old building, where the current headquarters is. And we thought our first thought was to try to fit in like an infill between the two historical buildings. But the more we looked at it, the more it felt like an annoying newcomer butting in between two old friends. So we thought we should stay low, we should be part of the valley. We had a program with a series of different galleries, so we could make a village of interconnected galleries at a smaller scale, almost like huts, organize them maybe as a single trajectory, ending up with the workshop. So we tried to do that in various ways. We tried to stay completely part of the landscape. We are in Switzerland. So we sort of gradually, you can see that the process takes on a life on its own and sort of spins out of control. So what we ended up doing was to take the program of continuous galleries, it's a linear trajectory, turn it into a single journey that's coiled up to fit the site with the biggest gallery in the middle. Placing it on the site, you have this journey that takes you to the middle and then out again and then back to the workshops. The roof follows the tilting topography, so we can get light and air deep into the floor plate. We have, when you arrive, you get a beautiful view out over the valley. Part of it is that you actually pass by the sort of the master watchmakers, and you can sort of look them over the shoulder as they're repairing the historical timepieces. They get northern light in. That's the way they've been working for 150 years. And one of the things you'll notice is that there are no columns. And that's because you can say one of the main features of watchmaking is miniaturization, where you make the elements thinner and smaller. Skeletonization, where you carve out the material you don't need for a gear to make it lighter. So it's, in a way, trying to get the maximum impact with the minimum of material. And glass is actually stronger than steel when it comes to compression. It's very bad at tension. And when there's an earthquake, and you have earthquakes in the Jura Mountains, it buckles and breaks. But because of the curvature, the curve or the arc makes the glass so rigid that it can actually withstand an earthquake and actually carry the roof. So you have this like super light structure where the roof seems to be almost like a spiral hovering or spring hovering above you. And then we restore the existing building. So basically, when you present an idea like this, it feels almost inevitable that, of course, the Museum of Watchmaking wants to be like this, but you're just forgetting that you had to kiss like 50 frogs before you got there. And we actually building. It'll be done in 2019, but we have a functional mock-up because the client thought it was a good idea to actually see if the glass would carry the steel roof, and it does. Because of the importance of making all these tests, all these attempts, these models, we love building models. Sometimes we build gigantic models, and sometimes we actually build them out of Lego. We have Lego all over the office. Our signage is actually made out of Lego. So when we got approached by Lego to see if we could make a space or a museum for, like the world seen through the eyes of Lego, if you like, we were sort of incredibly excited. This is what a space looked like. This is like after concept design, the sort of the amount of sketch models, the amount of information, tests, diagrams, drawings. And the result is that we are actually currently building the Lego house, which is a cloud of interconnected galleries that actually covers a central urban space that is fully public for all of the citizens of Billund, or like anyone who comes by. You don't have to buy a ticket to inhabit the public space. It has various, a cafe, sort of an event space, a museum. It has a museum store, obviously. And from here you can ascend up into the actual galleries where you can learn all the different aspects of Lego, its impact on a child's learning. You can see artworks by Lego artists. But then actually the roof of the building is also a publicly accessible sort of mount of interconnected playgrounds that are, again, completely public for anyone, sort of almost as a present to the community. We started construction. It's opening in 1 year. Of course, the foundations are concrete Lego bricks. This is one of my favorite photos in the world. It's me and all of the richest people in Denmark, because the family that makes Lego are the richest people in Denmark. I think it says something about Denmark when the richest guy is the guy who makes Lego. And you can also get the museum. We didn't have to adapt the design to make it buildable out of Lego. And you can get the architect included in the... I often get this sort of objection that these things only function in sort of socialist Scandinavia. But almost 6 years ago, I got invited to take a look at a site on the west side of Manhattan. It's basically located between a sanitation garage and a power plant, Kahn Edison power plant, and the West Side Highway. The power plant is actually designed by Stanford White, another architect that died in dramatic circumstances. He was shot in the back by the jealous husband of his mistress at Madison Square Garden. And Madison Square Garden is where Penn Station is now. So it's, we thought what they really need here, it's on the waterfront, it's a lovely place, but it's really surrounded by power plant, sanitation garage, and a highway. They need an oasis, and you can say this is the courtyard building in Copenhagen where my dad grew up. The courtyard building is at the architectural scale what Central Park is at the urban scale, an oasis in the middle of the city. So we thought, what happens when you combine the density of a skyscraper with the communal space of a courtyard, or what could a courtscraper look like? So we placed the courtyard on the waterfront, lifted it up to 500 feet in the northeast corner, but still keeping the south and the west low for sunshine and views. The result is this like striking silhouette on the west side waterfront. 2/3 of the homes have terraces sunken into this sloping roof. It looks like a spire from the east. The courtyard has the same proportions as Central Park, only it's 13,000 times smaller. Sort of a bonsai Central Park. And it has the height of a handrail to the southwest and the height of a high-rise to the northeast. So basically, these are some of our sort of renderings when we launched the project. And this is actually what it looks like today. The first 50 people have moved in. And essentially, this like really striking geometry, it's a hyperbolic paraboloid, is the sort of spire that you see is a sort of a child of trying to bring these two unlikely typologies, the courtyard and the skyscraper, together. You can start seeing the park that's going to inhabit the courtyard coming to life, and a rather striking silhouette on the skyline. This is the view when I fly into Newark. It's a view that makes the architect very happy when. So another sort of like icon of the skyline of New York that is obviously no longer here was, of course, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. In their absence, the footprints have been sort of commemorated in the form of these two beautiful fountains. One World Trade Center has been built. And they're actually sort of finishing 4 World Trade Center, 3 World Trade Centers currently under construction. But almost 2 years ago, we got invited to look at designing the last tower of the World Trade Center that would sort of complete this sort of ascending spiral of towers that frame the memorial. And one of the things that's like, apart from the role of being sort of the completion of where the city frames the space where we remember what happened in 9/11, it's also located exactly at the encounter between Tribeca, this sort of almost like European streetscape of city blocks, and the skyscrapers of the financial district. So we thought it could also be interesting to create a building that would feel equally at home, among the sort of slick glass towers of the financial district and the city blocks of Tribeca, if you could sort of merge those two elements together. And it just so happens that it's a 2.5 million square foot tower. So also, like, today you have a mixture of different kinds of tenants in the financial district. It used to be the financial district, but now you actually have a lot of TAMI tenants, like more creative companies. A lot of the major publishing houses have moved there recently. A lot of creative companies, including our own office, a lot of architecture offices are located there. So we thought, like, it's not like it's like a one-size-fits-all. You actually need really large creative floor plates where you can sort of do things also. Television studios, newsrooms, and sort of more intimate floor plates. So the idea was to actually sort of try to sort of take 7 different kinds of buildings and put them together to form a single tower that towards the memorial and the rest of the World Trade Center forms a single tower, a silhouette. It's sort of shaped by Libeskind's wedge of light. The master plan wants a sort of a street wall on the ground, but then basically we're making these like long and slender floor plates that gradually sort of become more square floor plates. So essentially, on one hand, it sort of diminishes towards the top. Towards the west, it actually expands towards the top, creating a line that echoes the inclination of the One World Trade Center. So even though it's no longer the Twin Towers, they actually have almost like a yin-yang relationship rather than being identical, but it's still a conversation between the two. So this is what it's going to look like. So very sort of understated and sort of solemn towards the fountain, and then it creates this sort of striking silhouette that expands as the One World Trade Center recedes. And towards the memorial, it's part of this sort of a school of buildings that are very contemporary and sort of elegant. But towards Tribeca, you really see the articulation of the 7 city blocks stacked on top of each other. They also create a series of gigantic hanging gardens. So you can actually be working on the 60th floor and go out and have this like big piece of nature. We're working with like sunken courtyards that create these like oases on some of the levels. In general, we're trying to take as much advantage of the outdoor space as possible so that the amenities can sort of enjoy the outside, the sort of an inside-outside continuity. And then we're playing with this idea of having a series of interconnected double-height spaces that would actually allow people, even though sort of a company is spread over multiple levels, you can actually see one of your colleagues 5 floors up or 5 floors down. And in that sense, sort of remember to sort of exchange the ideas or pass on the information that you might otherwise forget. And of course, we're hoping to make maybe an auditorium or like a screening room that could rival the coolness of this space, because when you sort of eliminate the screen, you have a view that's even cooler than what was on the screen before. And of course, from one angle, it it almost looks like a giant stair climbing towards the sky. The funny thing about this is like, as an architect, because architecture by definition is a public art form because our buildings are sitting outside in public space where people can see them and respond to them, it almost doesn't matter what you intend in a way, or it's not like you as an architect have any kind of monopoly on interpreting your own work, because the second you put it out there, it becomes everybody else's. And when we presented this project a year ago, I got a letter from the brother of one of the first responders from 9/11, a firefighter who gave his life at 9/11, and he wrote me a letter saying that that he really liked our design because he saw it as a giant staircase to heaven, commemorating the heroic stair climb of the firefighters, but also commemorating or echoing the ascent of the innocent souls that died at 9/11. And to him, it was very beautiful that not only the two fountains would commemorate the sacrifice and heroism of 9/11, but actually the skyline of the city itself could be seen as a giant memorial. He found really cool. And I had to write back and tell him that we had never thought of it like this, but after he said it, it's going to be hard to think of the building without also thinking about that aspect. And because it's intended to be a, so on one hand you see the stair silhouette, on the other hand this sort of expansion when you see it from below, but then when you see it from Tribeca's side, we're actually also playing with this idea that the undersides could be sort of a fifth facade looking down, and it could be sort of interactive artworks that would somehow signal a lively building towards the surrounding city. So having arrived in America, and it's interesting just as a comparison, the World Trade Center is a workspace of 2.5 million square feet. We're actually in parallel working for Google on doing their headquarters in Mountain View in collaboration with Thomas Heatherwick. And it's a very similar size, the first two phases, but in a completely different context. And our sort of big question was that Google had already become famous for almost becoming the template for the creative contemporary technology office. So what would Google 2.0 as a workspace look like? They've become famous for being colorful, playful, active, and sort of healthy work environments. Actually, do you still have your clicker? Because I mean, I think this one is also running out of battery. Fantastic. But because they've also become the standard of Silicon Valley, they felt it was time to change. You can also say when they started, they were like a small startup, and now they've become sort of a global behemoth of 30,000 people. And also slowly they're starting to sort of take an interest in physical space with VR, with hardware, with Google cars, and also with some of the moonshots, like providing internet to the entire planet with hot air balloons. They're becoming server hosts, and they've started mapping the entire planet for Google Earth. So maybe there was time to take a step into actually building something, because until now they've been a hermit crab, always redecorating the spaces of other technology companies. So also when you look at the Google campus as it stands, it has practically the same size as the downtown area of the city they're in. And this is true for all of Silicon Valley, that for each town you have an equivalent corporate headquarter that almost dwarfs the town in size. So these can't any longer be sort of like a little corporate fortress. They have to become neighborhoods. So we developed a strategy together with Google to eliminate as much parking as possible on the surface, to bring the park back instead of parking, to create these canopies that cover large areas underneath which we can actually make a very sort of free and flexible human scale where Google is quite free to sort of create their work environments. And sort of based on this sort of master plan, we then sort of took a look at the individual Googler. So each Googler is part of a studio. Each studio is part of a bigger group, which is the team. Then the teams sort of bundle up into neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods bundle up into communities. And of course, a handful of communities become an entire building. So how can you make a little town for 3,000 people in a way that you know, takes advantage of the scale, but feels intimate? Normally, the floor plate is blocked by all the support functions, the meeting rooms, the bathrooms, the snack kitchens, the laboratories. But we're saying, like, we're going to put all of this underneath, so it's always omnipresent and accessible. And then each of the communities become a giant table that is docking together with the neighbors to form a continuous floor plate. You always have these social courtyards that are surrounded by all the support functions. And in each courtyard is a column that carries this giant draped roof. The roof has these openings that bring exactly the amount of daylight you want to have the perfect natural light for each workspace. And the rest of the light we harvest with photovoltaics. So every single photon that hits the building is going to be used to see or to for power. And that basically gives us sort of 4 conceptual layers. On one hand, the sort of the landscape of the site that continues in the courtyards. The Medina, which is like this sort of active, more sort of noisy situation where you have meeting rooms and visitors and snack kitchens and social spaces, auditoria, etc. Then the workspace, which is this big open field where we sort of refer to Burning Man, this idea that in a big sort of open condition, you actually have potential for a lot of freedom. And finally, the clouds, which is the canopy that just emits exactly the light you want for your work situation. And just to sort of compare it with the sort of traditional office space, where you can say a typical office building in an office park has a spectacular lobby, but then the rest of the space is rather straightforward. Here, the sort of the main workspace is actually this sort of cathedral for work with up to 120-foot ceilings. Instead of having daylight at the windows and then it gets darker and darker, here you have perfect daylight for every single Googler. And finally, rather than having, you know, the more noisy spaces spread out everywhere, here the sort of the Medina level is where you have all the external meetings and where you have all the social spaces, and that actually leaves the sort of cathedral for working as a sort of more like a sanctuary for focused work. So in a few years, if you arrive to Google, we're actually continuing something called the Green Loop, a public park through the workspace on the lower level, where you will actually be able to pass through and get glimpses into some of the courtyards and see some of the things that are happening. Here you'll also have a more sort of lively environment of restaurants, cafes. Damn it. There's just too much. You're going to be surprised to see that I call this file Louis Kahn short. So. And then you have the courtyards where you can ascend up to the spaces above, and where we imagine the sort of possibility to create temporary enclosures, but essentially everybody is working on a single level. So that's like two extremely different ways of organizing a similar size workspace. That brings me to the last sort of idea that I wanted to talk about, and that's something that has been sort of following us over the last decade. Is the idea of social infrastructure, and it's back to this idea like how our own workspace is in a form of factory, that we all know that infrastructure can have a negative impact on our environment. For instance, like when an elevated bridge touches a downtown, we were asked to look at this place in Vancouver where Granville Bridge touches downtown, and sort of it means that even though the entire city has grown around it, this particular place is left undeveloped. And we just started mapping all the constraints. You have setbacks from the streets, setbacks from the bridges. Then there's like a 100-foot setback because the city wants to make sure that nobody looks into the traffic on the bridge. Then there's a park where we don't want to cast any shadows. And finally, we're left with a tiny 6,000 square foot footprint. So we thought, if the 100-foot setback has to do with the minimum distance, once we get 100 feet up in the air, we can actually grow back our building. It's almost as if, you're arriving and someone is pulling a curtain aside. Welcome to Vancouver. Or like when a weed grows through the cracks in the pavement and starts blossoming when it gets light and air. It's almost like a similar mechanism that the Flatiron is actually the sort of intersection between the regular grid of Manhattan and the diagonal of Broadway. And then this moment where the rising real estate prices, the advent of steel structure and elevators made it suddenly into like what is now the namesake of a whole neighborhood in Manhattan. Except we're taking it like maybe one step further. And then sort of underneath, we're trying to turn the underside of the bridge into a positive. So we're working with a series of local artists, including Rodney Graham, to turn the underside of the bridge into the 16th chapel of street art. Or just like, Grand Central Station or at the station here, like when you look up, you actually have these sort of beautiful ceilings. Here you'll see it in the form of contemporary Vancouver photo art. So that's essentially trying to turn the negative impact of a piece of infrastructure into a positive for the neighborhood. But it can also work in other ways, like when a piece of infrastructure gets decommissioned, it can become the space for contemporary culture. We recently built the Danish Maritime Museum next to Hamlet's castle Kronborg. Kronborg used to be the home of the museum, but when it acquired UNESCO World Heritage, they had to put it somewhere else. And the suggestion was to put it inside the dry dock where they used to build ships. And there was a dilemma, because on one hand, because of UNESCO, we couldn't stick as much as a foot out of the ground to not disturb the view of the castle. But the museum wanted an architectural masterpiece that would sort of attract people to visit. So we came up with the idea of basically turning the dock inside out to use the museum to preserve the dock. All we had to do was design a series of bridges, one that stops the water from coming in, one that connects to the castle, and one that gradually descends down into the museum. We also had to design like elements that would stop cars from dropping into the dock. So these are these elements you normally tie ships to that also serve as benches. And then for those who can read Morse code, there's actually a secret message. The bridges, we could build them in a shipyard in China, the same way that you build ships. We could lift them into place. So you see we couldn't even put an elevator on the side. So to give ADA accessibility, there's like this gently descending ramp that takes you into the museum as the main entrance. Then you have like a series of different spaces, like intimate spaces, vast spaces. And the general architecture is this sort of encounter, the drama of the encounter between the old and the new, the lightness of the glass and the steel, the heaviness and the texture of the concrete. One bridge is an auditorium where the seats continue under the stage and become an auditorium for children. I'm unhappy with all my clickers. You have the cafe where you're looking through the different layers of transparency. And actually, not only has the auditorium become sort of a performance space in the city, because of the hard walls of the concrete and the open sky, you have amazing acoustics in the dock. So the dock has actually become this really, really nice performance venue in the summer in Elsinore. And you say, like, sort of, it's almost as if the horizon separates the sort of the history of the heritage of the castle and this sort of very contemporary world underneath it. This is this sort of inverse Titanic moment. But basically, this idea that once a piece of infrastructure gets decommissioned, it can be reinvented to serve as the framework for cultural space. Actually, sort of now having sort of worked with this sort of maritime industry, we're actually we're sort of co-founding a company that's going to do the first 500 units of student housing, where we're actually using industrial high cube containers to make student housing. And within the sea regulations, we can do a 3,000 square foot floor plate on a floating pontoon up to 20 feet of height. We've organized it so you can make space for 19 students on one of these units. We're using the seawater for like a heat pump. We have photovoltaics and solar panels. We don't have wind power. It was the original ambition. And this is what they look like. We're manufacturing them in a Polish shipyard as this like little pirate village of colorful container homes. You know, the 19 homes circulate a small courtyard for the students, and they have a shared roof terrace. And they have like these rather intimate, it's like 200 square foot units, but they have an abundance of daylight, and they have a waterfront view in a port where the water is so clean that you can swim in it. So you actually, for less than $750 a month, can get your own little waterfront penthouse in one of these guys. So that's almost like trying to hack into the efficiency of the maritime industry to respond to a sort of almost like a global lack for affordable student housing in major cities. So if Philadelphia needs student housing, you know who to call. Also, this sort of role of infrastructure, if piece of decommissioned infrastructure can turn into a cultural building, maybe a cultural building can actually serve as a piece of infrastructure. We're designing an art museum in a sculpture park in Norway, where we could place the museum anywhere we wanted. And the sculpture park is on either side of this river. And we thought, what if the museum actually becomes the bridge that turns the whole visit into a single promenade? So you arrive on your visit, you go through sort of a series of galleries. The skylights of the sculpture gallery turns 90 degrees and becomes a panoramic view of the mill. And then you continue your journey. So it's almost like a museum and a bridge and a sculpture. You can almost like see it like the biggest sculpture in the sculpture park. From certain angles, you might not even suspect that it is a building. But it is also the bridge that makes the whole sculpture park function as a single promenade. So that takes me to sort of the apex of social infrastructure. Having sort of moved to Manhattan 6 years ago, after 2.5 years, Sandy came and wiped out the city, left all of Lower Manhattan in the dark. According to a local cartoonist, it gave rise to a new neighborhood. And basically, it's a very simple sort of equation. Rising temperatures are creating accelerating wind speeds, which means that the northeast coast of the United States are being hit more frequently by stronger and stronger storms. Because of the funnel shape of New York Bight, storm surge is being channeled into or funneled into the mouth of the Hudson River, which basically puts 50% of the city at risk. And we were invited to look at making the 12 miles of necessary resiliency infrastructure of Manhattan in such a way that it would not become a seawall that segregates the life of the city from the water around it. And we started looking at the High Line, designed by Philadelphia native James Corner. And the High Line has actually become the second most frequently visited park in New York, only superseded by Central Park. And it is essentially a piece of decommissioned train tracks that have been added nice programs for people. So we thought, what if the resiliency infrastructure of Manhattan could come with premeditated positive social side effects from the beginning? And New York's history has very much been shaped by the clash of these two titans. On one hand, Robert Moses, the power broker, a public servant who made a lot of the necessary public works of New York, including highways and housing projects and parks, but often with a devastating impact on the local community. At some point, he wanted to run the Trans-Manhattan Highway through Greenwich Village, and he encountered resistance from Jane Jacobs, who was living in the village, and she rallied the local community, and in a sort of David-Goliath moment, she defeated the plans and saved the village. We thought, what if this project that we've called the Dry Line could be conceived as the love child of Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs? Because on one hand, to resist an incoming storm surge, you need 12 miles of sort of hard engineering and sort of coordinated planning. But to make it socially successful, it needs to happen rooted in the local communities. So we devised a strategy for how to actually take all of the necessary engineering recommendations, but to design them in a direct dialogue with different representatives from the local communities all along the Big U, or the Dry Line, as we call it. And I'd like to show you a 3-minute film we've made where you can see the people we worked with from the different communities. You can hear their experience from Sandy, and you can hear their concerns and their dreams for their future neighborhoods or their waterfronts, and see how it's going to look in a few years.
That was actually why Sandy was so bad, is because of the phase of the moon. It was already a very large high tide, as well as the storm surge coming in with the wind and the tide lining up perfectly to give us 14-foot tides instead of 8-foot.
The most shocking part of Hurricane Sandy was the fact that it exceeded expectations.
I think the sheer magnitude of it caught a lot of people off guard.
When Hurricane Sandy came, we were not prepared at all. I mean, not even the slightest.
Yeah, it was like an alien invasion of water. And not the good kind of water.
So yeah, I mean, it came right in front where there was literally boats on 14th Street floating in front of our window.
We had a sub-basement level office a block from here, and it was totally covered in water for 2 days. So we lost everything. Everything.
We're really concerned about another storm and the flooding that's possible, and we think that the next time it's going to come even further inland.
I'd like to see some type of flood protection in this area. That's going to happen. We're vulnerable, obviously, being this close to the water.
Something that just brings like more different walks of life, you know, another escape from just the busyness and the hustle and bustle.
There's this great space that could really become community space, cultural space, and active uses.
everyone enjoys space. And in New York and other congested cities, it's hard to come by.
Anything that makes the cities greener is just such a wonderful thing for not only the environment, but the people that live in the city too, to be able to be around that space.
The plans, the berming, the sense of how it can become into the natural landscape itself, how we want to program that is really the next challenge. We are the link, we're the tip in the sense of the big U. It's important that the entire waterfront of Lower Manhattan build in the plans that have been put forward, because we can not only fortify this great city of New York, but be a model for cities all over the world.
So the dry line is actually scheduled to, we're currently designing the first 7.5 miles, and we're scheduled to break ground in 2017 in the spring. I think it's just interesting that the dry line initiative was initiated under Bloomberg, and now Bloomberg is no longer the mayor of New York. He's now the chairman of the Serpentine Pavilion and gallery in Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens in London. Since the dry line, it's almost like this idea of dealing with incoming storm surge and climate change in the form of pavilions and parks. That the next project we will complete is going to be the Serpentine Pavilion that's going to open the 7th of June in Kensington Gardens. And it's one of these projects that, one of the curses of architecture is that it's such a slow sport that sometimes it takes 5-10 years to complete a project. Here we got the commission on the 8th of December, and we're opening the 7th of June. So that's half a year minus 1 day. So we thought it has to go fast. So we were actually already speaking with a company called Fiberline about making a shelving system out of their very strong glass fiber product. It's kind of this very elegant translucent material and super strong. And we thought, what if we actually just consider the pavilion as a giant shelf, or like a giant wall made out of shelves, almost like the simplest element of architecture. And then basically by sort of pulling the stacks of shelves apart, almost like unzipping the wall, on one side creating almost like a valley, and the other side creating a hill. We actually create a canyon or a cave inside the pavilion. We pave this cave with a wooden deck that also has a bench and a bar for various events, so it becomes like the pavilion space that they need. And essentially, the translucent material sort of makes it this a glowing sort of informal element that has accommodation on the outside. You can sort of climb and sit on the outside, but it also creates different kinds of spaces within, sort of depending on where you cut the section through it. It has a whole variety of different appearances. Meanwhile, on the other side, when you look at it in the elevation, it's a perfect rectangle, like this sort of perfect grid. So on one side, almost completely immaterial and completely rigid. And on the other hand, it's like this sort of opaque, blobby sculpture. And of course, inside you get this glacial feeling of the sunshine sort of filtering through the layers of fiberglass. So just to sort of finish off the last sort of example of social infrastructure that I'd like to show is a building that's actually under construction right now in Denmark. And it could be the future landmark of Copenhagen, but it's not a royal palace or a cultural palace. It's a power plant that turns household waste into electricity and district heating. The citizens of Copenhagen throw out their trash and it comes back as energy. And as an energy source, a ton of household trash equals 1 2/3 of an oil barrel. They work on an economy of scale, so they're typically ugly boxes that cast shadows on the neighbors and block the views. It's going to be the tallest and biggest building in Copenhagen. So we thought, like, how can we, it's going to be right next to the marina and where the locals go water skiing. So we thought, like, how can we make this a contribution to the neighborhood? And Danes love to ski. We have snow, but we have absolutely no mountains. But we have apparently mountains of garbage. So we have to go 6 hours by car to the south of Sweden to ski. But because of the size of our power plant, we can do 2/3 of this by turning the roof into a gigantic public park with a ski slope, complete with sort of pine trees, hiking paths. Miraculously, we won the competition based on this idea. So suddenly we had to figure it out. It's twice the length of an Olympic half pipe, and you might have noticed that in Sochi, Denmark won 0 medals. We hope to improve on this because, like, from 2017, we can actually practice at home. Also, of course, for skiers, it's going to be a destination, but you can also just go there as a public park. You can hike, you can picnic, you can enjoy the view of the otherwise flat city of Copenhagen. It's going to have the tallest climbing wall in the world, 300 feet of vertical danger. It's quite close to coming to completion in this sense of trying to sort of realizing cities and buildings as man-made ecosystems, because not only do we locally harvest daylight, airflows, rainwater, but also together with the citizens of Copenhagen, it forms a metabolism that converts waste into resource. It's very much under construction, and it is really becoming a rather epic experience of this sort of giant man-made mountain. That's the administration in the tallest part. Here you see the hill forming. The reason we could win the competition on such an insane idea is because the most amazing thing about this power plant is that it's going to be the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. The smoke that comes out of the chimney contains only a little bit of CO2 and a little bit of steam, but no toxins. So the most amazing thing about the power plant is completely invisible, and you would have to write it in a pamphlet all the time. But by turning the park, the roof into a park, it becomes blatantly obvious that this is a new kind of power plant where you actually literally have clean mountain air on the roof of it. And that's why the CEO of the company could choose this idea and make it happen. To take this like one step further, we decided to design the chimney in such a way that it accumulates steam, and then at regular intervals, it puffs a gigantic smoke ring or a steam ring. So rather than being this sort of symbol of perpetual pollution, it becomes a celebration that every time we've saved the emission of 1 ton of CO2 by replacing the previous power plant, we celebrate it by puffing a smoke ring. Again, like, you get these ideas, then you win the competition, and then you have to deliver. And when you open the yellow pages, there are no giant steam ring emitting contractors. So we've made a series of tests together with Copenhagen University and a guy called Rocket Madsen. And this is a test we did 2 summers ago.
Hvor er det vigtigt! Hvor er det vigtigt!
though it seems a little bit silly to obsess about getting a power plant to blow smoke rings, I think it's quite important because I think one of the most beautiful things about architecture is that at its core, it is almost like it's like the art and science of turning fiction into fact. Because we're sitting in our architecture studios, and we are sort of trying to sort of make these, come up with these wild ideas, and they're like pure figments of our imagination. And then we spend like the next, 5 years or 10 years, solving all the technical problems, like applying for all the permits, raising all the funds, making it happen, and then it just becomes concrete reality. It really has this like world-changing aspects that it goes from being something you came up with to being that's just how it is. And I love this idea that if somebody visits Europe in 2 years, then they're going to come home and then they're going to say like Europe. There's like a lot of interesting places like in Venice, in Italy, they sail in gondolas through streets paved with water, and in Denmark they ski on their power plants that turn their waste into electricity and heating, and where the chimneys puff gigantic smoke rings. And that's just how it is in Denmark. So I think sort of as a departing thought, like I think that also means that whenever we are sort of invited to intervene in a situation in our city, not only do we have the possibility, we actually have the responsibility to make the city and the world we live in a little bit more like our dreams.
Thank you, Bjarke. That was really fantastic. Really, really enjoyed it. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca Johnson. I'm Executive Director of the Center for Architecture and Design in AIA Philadelphia. We're going to continue our program in just a minute. If any of you have written down questions, at this time I'd like my volunteers to come down and walk up and down the aisles. Please pass your questions to the end. And these questions will guide our Q&A, which we're going to begin in just a moment. This evening's event is a very important piece of the Center's mission to engage the public in dialogue and conversation about architecture and design, the past, the future, and the present. We are very excited to have Bjarke here tonight at the Louis Kahn Memorial Lecture and Award. This is just one of the things we do. We do exhibits, we do tours, and as well as our signature event, Design Philadelphia. The center recently renamed itself to the Center of Architecture and Design, and we also have a brand new space. So we hope that you will come visit us soon and see our new space. The AIA National Convention is here next week. We're giving away free coffee, so come on over Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. We could not accomplish all the things that we do without the support of our sponsors and our wonderful leadership and staff. So I want to just take a moment to thank everyone once again, our sponsors of tonight's event: Liberty Property Trust, Clemens Construction, Powell Trackman, Logan, Carl, and Lombardo, this beautiful venue, the University of Pennsylvania Museum, Cozen, LF Driscoll, Aileen and Brian Roberts, the General Building Contractors Association, the Neubauer Family Foundation, PIDC and the Navy Yard, Marvin Windows and Doors, and finally, our media partner, WHYY. Without your generous support, tonight would not have happened. It also wouldn't have happened without the leadership and tenacity of our committee chair, Bill McDowell. Bill works really, really hard to make this event what it is. So thank you, Bill, very, very much. I also want to thank David Bender, who's collecting questions, our associate director. He did such a great job. Thank you, David. And also, Bjarke, thank you so much for coming to Philadelphia tonight. We're really, really happy that you did. Just want to also note that we have one of Bjarke's books for sale out front if you want to look into his work and explore it further. Now I'd like to invite to the stage Tanya English to lead our Q&A portion of the program. Tanya is WHYY's senior health writer, and she created the series Designs on Health, which looks at the ways that zoning can influence a community's well-being. She's also a contributor on WHYY's national weekly radio show, The Pulse, on health, science, and innovation news. We are very pleased to have her with us this evening. Help me in welcoming Tanya English.
So first, welcome to Philadelphia. Congratulations on really joining a group of honorees, Kahn honorees. That's just amazing. Let's give another round of applause for that. So you've talked a lot about upstart architects and they're kind of throwing away the old and rigidly kind of breaking free of that. Talk to me a little bit about, as you come closer to the middle of your career and further away from the beginning of your career, how does that change and challenge you?
I mean, I still feel that I have a few years in me. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think one of the great things about architecture is that you get better at it mm-hmm. the more you do it. And I also think it is somehow like when because architecture happens against so many and in the turmoil of so many forces that are way greater than the mandate that any architect has. Like no matter how stubborn you are, there's just like certain forces that you can't bend. And I think you do get maybe smarter at navigating those forces, and also at some point, the fact that you have actually proven once or twice yep. that you could somehow defy the conventions means that certain people become more willing to experiment with you, and I think in that sense, also like a lot of the work we did in Copenhagen has been with the same clients, multiple projects, and no doubt what succeeded in the first project gave everybody a greater appetite for the next one and the next one, and I think in that sense I think that is why you see often that architects, let's say like rock stars or athletes, maybe peak like at an earlier age.
Have you peaked?
No, I think that's the good thing about architecture is that, like Frank Lloyd Wright did his greatest work, I think after he had turned 70, or at least well into his 60s, the same thing with Frank Gehry. Louis Kahn started relatively early, and he was pretty consistent throughout. So I don't know if you would attribute. I think his production is incredibly constant, but he was reasonably young when he founded his office.
Okay. One of our audience members asked, you're spending more time in the US, and we hear from Europeans, maybe a socialist perspective, that Americans are somehow less socially conscious. Is that a bad rap? Tell us your experience with working with American clients.
I mean, the things.
Have you heard that before?
I mean, I live in New York, which is by American standards, practically social democracy.
Okay.
I mean, of course, one of the things about Denmark, it says that it is the socially most equal place on the planet. So in that sense, certain things are of course possible, mm-hmm. and nobody's afraid of getting mugged or robbed because they all have roughly the same income. So it wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So in that sense, there's of course certain experiments that are possible in Copenhagen where you have to tread more carefully here. But I'm actually seeing
What do you mean by that? Like putting in park benches, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, but even like that. In Denmark, you have a meeting with the city, and they will be like all about, how many benches are you going to put up?
Right.
And here it's going to be more like, oh, a bench. Is that really necessary? You know, people might sit on it. So I think there's a certain, and it's just like there's a, I think sometimes it's a more complicated equation that needs to be solved. But for instance, like with the project that we're just completing in New York, this is like the introduction of the courtyard, which I think is a quite nice Scandinavian invention, because in New York you have either a completely public park where a parent would get arrested if they would leave their child on their own. Like there was like a famous story, like in Denmark, mothers and fathers, they tend to leave their babies in baby strollers outside the cafes. Right. And a mom did that in New York 15 years ago, and police came by and arrested her and took her baby. And like in Denmark, the news was about how barbarian authorities were and of course here it was like this woman just leaving her child to rot in the cold. I think the courtyard is this nice invention where it's communal, but it's not public. Okay. So it's a space that's shared between 600-700 households, and I think that has an amazing potential, because in a big city context, it actually boils down your community to a size that's maybe more manageable. And I'm quite curious to see how those experiments can actually start working, because it's neither completely private nor completely public. It's maybe an interesting hybrid of a scale that could be missing in a major city.
Talk more about those competing forces. You've been a proponent of bigamy, not in marriage, but in architecture. What does that mean?
Yeah, but it's basically it's this idea that quite often I think what seems to be mutually exclusive ideas, once you combine them, it's almost like everybody learns you have to kill your darlings, or everybody learns that things have to be consistent, and that is also often true. But sometimes, if you take one thing that is really great and another thing that's also really great, and you combine them, you can actually get amazing things. I think the Americans are masters of this, like the whole idea of surf and turf. A steak with a lobster,
right.
And it's basically lobsters are great and steak is great. Yeah.
We want it all. We don't have to choose it all, right? We can have it all.
Exactly, and I think sometimes like the court scraper is a skyscraper and a courtyard building, which would normally not go hand in hand, but here it actually creates a wonderful hybrid. And at the end of the day, I think most people can testify that they're like the child of seemingly mutually exclusive ideas of their mother and their father that somehow came together and became them.
Tell me more, though, about what are the concepts. So you said public and private. What are some of the other competing concepts? Is it ecology versus economy?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I taught a studio at Harvard like a decade ago that was called Ecolomy Studio. Okay. Like combining those two words, and I think maybe less now, because if you look at some of the most expanding businesses are actually environmental technology these days. But back then there was almost like there was either economic interests or there was like environmental interests, so ecology versus economy. Right. And we were just trying to find ways to show that the two could actually go hand in hand by exploring synergy. And for instance, you can say the concept of hedonistic sustainability.
That I don't have to always take cold showers, that I don't have to wear a sweater at home.
Exactly, okay. And you can say the power plant is the pure manifestation of that, because not only is it nice for the environment and the birds that you don't have toxins coming out of the chimney, it also means that suddenly we have our first alpine ski slope in Copenhagen.
Sustainability can be fun.
Yeah, exactly.
It should be fun, okay. Got it. You've said that it's really rare to actually get to build something. There could be years between the time when you can build something. Talk to us about that middle process. What do you love in there? Is it the sketches, is it the models, it's design, meeting with clients? Between actually building things, what do you love in there?
I think it's, sort of, at the end of the day, architects are always like working on trying to be in a position where something can get built. Right. And in that sense, like it's quite hard for an architect to set the agenda because we don't have any, we don't have any political power, so we can't say this is how it's going to happen, and we don't have any financial power because we can't pay for it. Right. So at the end of the day, like we somehow have to, the only power we have is the power of our ideas. So we have to somehow wait for a situation or be there when a situation occurs where someone needs something and wants something to happen, and then be there to make whatever needs to happen and wants to happen, but in a way that also realizes the other elements in your agenda. So it's in a way like, and I think that's almost like the secret sauce in the way we work, is that it's always very hard to argue for something that goes above and beyond the standard solution. Mm-hmm. But the standard solution, and the standard solution is the way it is because it's really good at delivering what it's there for. And it's often a single criteria. And in that sense, like a typical example of a standard solution is a sort of a housing project with some high-rises that have a certain height because after a certain scale, you need one extra fire stair or one extra elevator, then it becomes more expensive. Okay. And then, you want some orientation, east and west to get some nice daylight, and then you want a minimum distance to the next one, and then it's like cookie cutter, rubber stamp, but it says nothing about, the quality of life between the buildings, the environmental impact, the prevailing winds, sunlight, the distribution of program, distribution of different kinds of households, etc. So when we start a project, we try to listen very carefully about what is it that needs to happen and wants to happen, but then are there other things in the neighborhood that maybe should happen? Are there ways that we could create added value by making something maybe a little bit denser, or like to greet people where they're coming from so they will be channeled to certain places? So
Can I interrupt you? How do you bring the public or lay people into that conversation? You said you want architects to talk a little bit less to each other and more to lay people in the public. How do you do that?
I'm going to finish my point and then I'm going to answer your question.
Yeah.
Because but by doing that, we pile on demands.
Right.
And suddenly the standard solution doesn't work any longer because it only serves one of the demands. When you pile on demands in a way by making the problem more difficult to solve, suddenly the standard solution can no longer solve the problem, and you force the architecture into something more exciting and interesting. So I think sometimes rather than ignoring the constraints, by actually bringing on more constraints, you can free yourself. And I think the way that we try to involve people is in a way to meet them where they are. Because I mean, the biggest experts in what people care for are the people themselves. Mm-hmm. So rather than asking them for solutions, because at the end of the day, I think what you train for as an architect is that you get really good at translating demands into designs.
Okay.
But by asking people about what they care for, what would they want to see, what are they afraid of seeing, what are the things that annoys them the most, what are the things that could be so much better, you start piling on demands and desires, and then our job is to translate those demands and desires into designs.
Got it. We're wrapping up. We have about 2 more minutes. We've got some students from Chad High School. They're 15, 16, 17-year-old. Tell us about you when you were that age, and what were you doing with your free time that would suggest that you would become an architect later in life?
I remember that when I was 16 and 17, I slept so much. It was like it was amazing. Enjoy it.
While you can.
Enjoy it while it lasts.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, I actually drew since I was in kindergarten. And I've always been cartooning a lot, and I thought I was going to become a cartoonist. And in a way, in the absence of a cartoon academy, I enrolled in the School of Architecture at the Art Academy.
Yes.
But I think, and Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 10,000 hours, and I think maybe I put my 10,000 hours into drawing. Huh. So I think at the end of the day, like they say, find a job you like and you won't have to work another day in your life again. Or if it feels like work, you're doing something wrong. I think one truth that is probably quite true is that, that if you somehow try to focus on the things that you really enjoy doing, you're probably going to get better at it because you enjoy it more, you'll do it more, and you'll reach the 10,000 hours that Malcolm Gladwell prescribes easier.
Okay, so we're closing out. We're all looking forward to going to your intrepid Navy Yard building. If we could get a corner office or a cubicle or a shared workspace, how do you want us to be interacting with that building?
I mean, in a way, like we really kept it as free and flexible as possible. And I think when you go there, you'll see, like we were just walking around the building. It's like practically done, and it has, I think it has some bare bones that have something quite exciting, and I think maybe before any tenant starts turning it into what they already know in the beginning, right. Try to sort of fall a little bit in love with what's already there, and see how that could work. Because I mean, I even think as architects, each time it's almost like being a journalist. That you know, journalists rarely interview other journalists. They report on all kinds of other things that are outside journalism, but their job is to find an interesting angle that can make this particular situation relevant to the audience and society. And I think in a similar way, we always arrive at new situations and we try to somehow fall in love with the place and in the problem that needs to be solved, and find an angle that can make this particular location relevant to the people around it.
Wonderful. Bjarke Ingels, thank you for helping us shape Philadelphia. And now please welcome Jim Rowe, Board President of the Center for Architecture and Design, and Ann Papageorge, Vice President of Facilities and Real Estate at the University of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Tanya. Bjarke, we'd like to present you with a memento of Louis Kahn, and because of your meaningful participation in tonight's memorial event. On behalf of the Center for Architecture and Design, we're pleased to present you with the 2016 Louis I. Kahn Memorial Award in honor of your distinguished achievements as an architect and for contributing to the storied legacy of Kahn with your presentation this evening. Congratulations, Bjarke Ingels.
Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. Ta-da.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you all, and good night. Thanks.